listening to Food Trucks in Babylon, a Western Seminary podcast. Join Dr. Todd Miles and Dr. Andrew Pack as they talk about theology, culture, and ministry in a post-Christian context.
Hello, this is Todd Miles. I'm here with Andrew Pack, and we have a special guest today, Roni Sasaki, a Paralympic gold medalist and Western Seminary student. I've known you for, is this our second year?
Yeah, I'm in my second year.
All right. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's fun to be here.
Yeah. So you walked into my class the very first day, and I think I said something along the lines of, hey, let's go around the class and introduce yourself and tell us, who you are, where you're from, and say something interesting about yourself. And you said something along the lines of, my name is Roni, the church you are from, and I've only got one leg, or something, or something like that.
Yes.
Was that what it was? Yeah.
Yes.
And which then just really raised the bar for interesting things that everyone else had to say, because how do you top that? This is something that's unique about me. So very, very intriguing. I've enjoyed having you in class, and you have a book out that chronicles this. It's really kind of a narrative of your life up to how long ago? Maybe
it was actually up to about 30 years ago.
Okay.
Because when I ended the book, I was pregnant with my son, who is 30.
That's right, and that's in the epilogue.
Yes.
The birth of your son. Excellent. Tell us about yourself, though.
All right. Well, I always like to tell people I have one leg because I walk a little different than others. I have a bit of a staggering gait.
Okay.
And so people wonder, I wonder what's going on with her. Some people think maybe I just have a knee replacement or whatever. So I like to just tell people right up front, I have one leg. I wear an artificial leg. And that's the reason that I walk the way that I do. And that kind of just clears the air. Everybody takes a deep breath and goes, I wondered what was going on there.
Okay.
So I like to share that. I do like to tell your listeners here that, I won a gold medal in the Paralympics. That was 30 years ago. I happened to be an older student who, in my, what would be considered senior years, I decided to, try on something completely new and different and came to seminary.
And as I read through your book, you tried a lot of things throughout your life that most people don't actually do. I would say that, and so I'm not surprised that you're at seminary, but I'm glad you're at seminary. You totally belong, for sure. You grew up in a Christian home.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, with actually a pretty significant Christian heritage. It sounds like, in terms of grandfathers and fathers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, my grandfather actually attended Western.
Nice.
And was a conservative Baptist pastor here in Portland for over 30 years in his career. And he was also on the board here. So when I decided to go to seminary, my grandpa's been gone now for about 30 years as well. Western just was the place for me to be.
You have to.
Yeah, and I am so grateful for that Christian heritage that I have. I know that it is a gift because not everybody has generations of Christianity in their family, which it provides a lot of good, solid, foundational faith for a youngster growing up in that environment.
Yeah, well, especially as I read through your book, you were dealing with the issue of, and you call it a
birth defect.
A birth defect, which
I'll
is
just go out and say it.
Okay, all right. Which is not what it's normally called today. You were telling me what?
Yeah, they call it limb difference now.
Limb
so
difference.
If somebody's born missing a limb or has something wrong with one of their limbs, I think the politically correct term is limb difference.
Okay.
So I was born with a limb difference in my right leg. It was only half there, and it was kind of weird because it was the bottom half. I'm missing the middle of my leg. My hip's kind of screwed up. And so that's why I walk with a little bit of a drunken stagger.
Okay.
Is because my hip doesn't have a normal swing to it.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me before I stumbled over the language here was that you grew up in a Christian home. You heard the gospel from a very, very young age. And that was a significant part of your coping and dealing with the fact that you were different than the other people your age. And it felt, as I read through it, like that was just a constant through the entirety of your life, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I was different. Obviously, it didn't take very long to play with the neighborhood kids and realize, wow, they have 2 legs and I only have 1. They can run faster than I can. And I wanted to be like all the other kids. I mean, I don't know how many kids that don't want to fit in with their peers. And it was no different back when I was a child. And I knew that I was born with my leg the way that it was. I know, having talked to my mother, as I got older, that she felt a tremendous amount of guilt because she feels that there was a drug that was prescribed to her when she was pregnant with me, and that she borrowed money for because she didn't have enough to buy the prescription. So she never borrowed money from her parents because she was very proud. But she did for this prescription, and was later told if she had just waited 2 weeks when she would have got paid, that I probably would have been born with both legs, that this particular prescription may have been what caused it. So she carried around this huge amount of weight that she had done something wrong. And as I grew up and began to deal with my own self-acceptance, and as a child, praying that God would fix me, praying in my room at night, God, please give me 2 normal legs, because I wanted to be like all the other kids, and then wake up in the morning and see that I still had 1 leg and wonder, well, what did I do wrong? Maybe I didn't pray hard enough. Maybe I didn't pray long enough. Maybe I've done something wrong to deserve this type of punishment. And I know my mom was dealing with the same kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
And at some point in time, I always tried to prove myself to everybody else. But there was a point in time when I realized that God made me for a reason. And I know that it was a process coming to that. But I would get so depressed and thinking that my life is just over. It's ruined. You've ruined my life, God, because you made me with 1 leg. And I don't know what I've ever done to deserve this. And these kind of things just kept playing over and over and over in my mind. And I remember one night as a young teenager in my room, crying again, because I think being a preteen is really difficult. I mean, let's face it, I had 1 leg. That's kind of an obvious defect, I'll say. But I think every young person, even older people, we have something about ourselves that we don't like. We have something about ourselves that we would change if we could. And perhaps it's classified as a defect according to, what's normal, if there is such a definition. Or maybe it's just something that nobody even knows about. But there's this inward struggle of self-acceptance that goes on. But I remember as a preteen crying at night, praying, and I really felt the presence of the Holy Spirit in my room, as if he was physically manifested, which he wasn't. But it was like I could audibly hear his voice as he said, Roni, don't you know I made you the way you are for a purpose? And I remember perking up just for a second, like, what? You made me this way for a purpose? Like I haven't done anything wrong? Like I didn't do anything to deserve this? You've got a plan? And at the end of this conversation, I basically remember saying, okay, if you want to use this body with only 1 leg, go right ahead. And I feel like from that moment on, my life did not change overnight. It didn't wake up suddenly like, oh, I'm so happy to have 1 leg. But definitely things began to happen and change. And my awareness was different because I was looking for why God would have made me with 1 leg. And in looking for that, it just opened up my eyes to a whole world of possibilities, of the beauty of being different. I began to see having 1 leg as a gift.
Oh, wow.
Rather than a curse. And then I found the verse, I remember I was 16 years old, and this was a few years after that moment in my room. And I was sitting by a lake at a camp that I was working at.
Camp Tadmor?
Camp Tadmor, yeah.
Camp Tadmor,
and I'm reading my Bible, and I just happened to open up Psalms 139, and that was the first time I'd ever read where, you form my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb, and I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And my soul knows this very well. And I realized that God designed me beautifully and intricately with a purpose. And I remember once I met a gentleman.
So that passage is not just for the people who have 2 legs, but you owned that for yourself.
Right. I'm willing to share it, though, with others. I believe God wrote it just for me, but,
that's very,
but I'm more than happy to share it with everybody else.
That's very generous of you. Nice. Sharing Psalm 139 with like every other person who's ever lived. That's great.
Especially when you get to verse 16, which I think is the verse, because I don't have it fully memorized, but where it says that God has a plan that he's ordained every day before one of them was even written, and he knows it. So basically I envision God sitting up in heaven or wherever he sits and thinking to himself, well, okay, I have this beautiful plan, beautiful life that I have designed for a girl, but she needs to have one leg in order to live out this plan. Who should I pick? And he just chose me.
Wow.
And gifted me with this.
Like you had a John 9 moment.
Exactly.
Right?
And I use that verse when I go out and speak because, the disciples and Jesus, they came across this man who was blind, and the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, his parents or the man that he was born blind? And that in that culture, that blind man, when he was born that way, they knew in advance that his life was going to be sitting on the sidewalk, holding a cardboard sign, forever relying on everybody else for his sustenance.
Yeah, a horrible life. And he is of age, right?
Yeah.
We read John 9 in like a millisecond, and we skip right to the part where it's like, well, it wasn't him who sinned. It wasn't his parents. Yeah. It was that the work of God could be displayed, right? But that man lived his whole life before that moment when he was healed. And it was a hard, miserable life, right?
Yeah, and I've always wondered, would they have seen it differently had they known that one day God of the universe is going to come strolling down the street and is going to heal him? And then he says to the disciples, nobody sinned. This man was made blind so that the glory of God would be shown. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing here.
Yep. Yep.
And what a huge opportunity, what a huge gift to be given to be able to glorify God. And furthermore, we read about this man forever and ever. Thousands of years he is remembered for the gift that God gave him to be able to be used in such a way as to give God glory.
His confession of faith is spine-tingling. It's like one of the greatest confessions in the entire Scripture. But his life was hard before that. It was really, really hard. So take us on a quick chronicle of the things that you did to achieve, to strive, to find some sense of normalcy. You played volleyball, cheerleading, beauty pageants. So walk us through some of that.
Yeah, these were all things that I tried to do, not just to prove that I could do it or could sort of do it. It's because they were actually things that I wanted to do. I wanted to be athletic. I watched Miss America. I hate to admit this in today's culture, but I really wanted to someday be Miss America and thought surely a one-legged person could do it, right? Yeah. Maybe now. Things were a little different back then. And so I was always trying to prove myself to others and prove myself to myself.
To yourself. Okay.
Yes. And I had a secret dream as a kid growing up to be an Olympic athlete. And I would fantasize in my brain about, like Flubber, the movie Flubber that does date me when I talk about that, where they put this special putty on the bottom of the shoes and all of a sudden began to leap, over the basketball hoop and slam dunk and everything. And I somehow thought that maybe there would be some kind of bionic prosthetics that would come along that would give me that kind of superhuman power. So I could just go out there and prove I can be as fast or jump as high as everybody else. And I remember my mother always saying, why don't you just do something you can be good at?
Thanks, Mom.
No, I have a great mom, mind you. She has a very great mom. And my parents sometimes sat back and thought, oh my gosh, what is this girl going to try next? But they gave me the freedom to be able to spread my wings a little bit and try, even if I did sometimes fall flat on my face. You could say failure. I certainly thought that at the time. But we one day watched on TV some one-legged skiers. My family did not ski, so I did not grow up in that environment.
But you were close. I mean, you were here
close.
In the Portland area.
Yeah,
right?
I grew up in this area in Mount Hood. There's skiers up there, and my uncle was a skier, and he used to take my brother skiing. My school had a ski club, so every Friday night during the winter time, the big bus would rumble under the parking lot, and all the skiers would get on that bus. And it was you knew who the ski club were in my school because they wore their jackets all day with their lift tickets.
With their lift tickets
dangling.
Yes. Yeah.
Back in those days, the wire wicket and the paper lift ticket.
Yeah. Was status.
Yeah, it was run through the zipper. And everybody that was a skier had not just one, you wanted to keep like 20 of them dangling. Yeah. So you could hear them coming down the hallway with the clanging of the lift tickets. And I wanted a lift ticket so badly. But we saw these one-legged skiers on television. And I thought, I could do that. I like the snow. I'm really strong on one leg. I think I could ski. So we began to make some phone calls and try to find somebody who could teach me how to ski. And it was about a 2-year process, and we just kept running into brick walls.
And you're in like high school?
Yeah, I was in high school. Yeah. And then like my senior year, it seemed like it came out of nowhere, but clearly all the calls that we had made, somehow my name and phone number got into the hands of a woman who was a ski instructor in an organization called SOAR, which is an acronym SOAR, Shared Outdoor Adventure Recreation, which I think is a little like Oregon Adaptive Sports is today.
Okay.
They would teach people with disabilities how to do all kinds of different things like kayaking and horseback riding and skiing. So I get a phone call, and it's this woman, her name is Jan, and she says, "Would you like to learn how to ski?" And I definitely wanted to learn how to ski, and so we made all the arrangements to go up to Mount Hood, and I was so excited to get my first lift ticket, and I could not wait because I was going to wear my ski jacket to school on Monday and dangle that lift ticket and show everybody.
I felt bad for you in the book when I read what you're about to say. So,
yes, well, we got up there, and she showed me how to put on my boot and put on my ski, and I used these things called outriggers. Okay. Instead of ski poles like a two-legged person would do, I used outriggers, and they're like a forearm crutch with a short ski tip mounted on the end.
Okay.
So they operated as my ski poles, and she explained all that. We got out there to the snow, and I said, "Okay, when do I get my lift ticket?" And she looked at me and said, "We're not going to get a lift ticket today." And I'm like, what do you mean? I was just crushed.
It's like hope deferred makes the heart sick, right?
She says, "I don't think we're going to be able to go on the chairlift today." She says, "The first thing we're going to learn is how to fall." And she proceeded then now to teach me how to fall all day long, because that's really all I did was fall down and get back up, fall down and get back up all day. So I never would have gotten on the chairlift. And eventually I did get my lift ticket, and I did learn how to ski. And a few years later, the same woman called me up and said, "Would you like to enter your first ski race?" And I'm like, you taught me how to fall so good that I'm not sure I can make a whole run without falling.
Without falling.
Yeah, what am I going to do in a ski race if I fall? I'm going to make a fool out of myself. She says, "Don't worry about it. You'll be competing against other one-legged women skiers who are just as bad as you are." Basically, they were all going to be beginners.
Which is kind of the opposite of why don't you find something you're good at?
Right. So I went up to Snoqualmie Summit. I agreed to do this race. I was so scared. We skied on a Saturday and a Sunday. We had two races. It was a slalom and a giant slalom. And I stood up for all four runs, which is each race had two runs, combination of those. And in doing so, apparently I was the best of the bad skiers, and I ended up getting 2 gold medals on those 2 days. And these were tiny little medals.
Okay.
You didn't need a microscope to see them, but almost. I mean, they were just tiny. But they did something to me. Like this was, wow, this is for a sporting event. I just won something for a sporting event. And I decided then and there that ski racing was going to be the sport for me. Okay. And graduated from college and moved to Colorado, got into a program, a competition training program for people with one leg, or people with all different disabilities. They were blind skiers.
Wow.
No-legged, people with no legs, people in wheelchairs, people with no arms, all different types of disabilities. Skiing is such a wonderfully adaptive sport. Mm-hmm. And, time training, 100% commitment for all those years. Eventually, the dream that was so impossible of being an Olympic athlete became possible as I skied in the 1992 Paralympics and ended up winning 1 gold medal and 2 bronze medals.
Nice. Wow.
So that's kind of the story.
And then you retired.
I retired. I was pregnant with my son in 1992, and he was born shortly after that. And then I ended up having 3 kids in 5 years, which I know is not keeping up with your daughter at all. But it was
pretty close.
It was a challenge for me nonetheless, because being a mom was really hard. It was harder than being a ski racer. But when you're a ski racer and you win a race, everybody cheers and claps, and you get your picture on the cover of a magazine or a newspaper or some kind of news article about yourself. When you're a mom and it's hard, nobody cares. Nobody notices.
Nobody notices.
You just secretly cry in your room at night because, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Anyway, so it was a bit of a change.
Throughout all this, you're a follower of Jesus. You've come to grips. You've found justification. You talk about justification, not in the salvation sense, but you found justification and rationalization and reason, probably purpose for this disability. What happened after that?
Well, it's pretty amazing because I believe, again, like I said, that God gave me a gift of having one leg. And I believe that skiing was a gift that he gave to me. It was like he knew I had this secret dream inside and said, I've got this beautiful plan for you, and it's going to blow your mind. And that was part of the scheme, even being a mom and having kids. But I began to be able to speak. I actually started speaking when I was 16. That same summer that I was at Camp Tadmor, they asked me to share my testimony to the other teenagers. And part of our initiation as staff, we had to share our testimony with the other staff people. And that was totally scary for me. But then after that, they asked me to speak at the Friday night firesides that they had. And I began to do that for all the different teen camps. And then
because you went off script, right? You didn't follow the format that was kind of prescribed, or I should say helpfully prescribed, probably is what they're doing. And yet you wrote that you did something a little different. You told your story.
Yeah.
And it was pretty profound.
People think that it's funny about having a disability, and I consider having one like a fairly minor disability, is that they're inspired. And I've fought that whole idea of being inspired for my entire life. Like, don't look at me and be inspired. I'm just a normal, everyday person. And yet I can't deny the fact that people are inspired by those of us with disabilities, especially if we accomplish something that is kind of great, like winning a gold medal or getting out of bed in the morning or whatever the case may be. So I realized that people like to hear my story because, number one, it makes them feel good. It makes them look at their own life and be grateful for what they do have. And it also helps them to look at those things that they don't like about themselves and say, maybe this is not as bad as I thought.
Okay.
Maybe this can be a gift. So I began to share this with others. And in doing so, I was invited to speak when I was, the following year, I was just a teenager for the Conservative Baptist Youth Association thing they used to have on the first of the year. They used to buy out both of the Red Lions on either side of the interstate bridge, and there'd be like 600 teenagers there. And they asked me to speak for that. So that was a big deal to me. But ever since then, I have been able to share my testimony, share my story, which certainly back then was still very much evolving because I wasn't even a skier back then, and people still wanted to hear my story because they like to hear about these things that are going to make them feel better, or help them learn more about themselves or understand themselves better. And so that's always my goal, is I want to give God glory. Just like that blind man was made blind to give God glory, my goal was always to give God glory and not just look at me, how great I am, but look at all the great things that God has done. In fact, in my book, I hope the purpose is clear when somebody reads it, is, it's a story about Roni Sasaki, but it's really a story about the goodness of God and all that he can do and does when we just allow him to say, hey, okay, God, if you want to use this one-legged body, be my guest. I'm here for you, or I'm available to you.
Well, and what I think is so compelling, why people feel so good, perhaps, at least in part, is that it's really easy to miss our purpose in the mundane and the extraordinary. But in this, it seems that God's really helped you to see. I mean, this would be true of all of us, right? Just like that psalm belongs to all of us. And you're so kind to share it with us, at least, But that formationally, like, God actually has a unique purpose for all of us. But like you're saying, it's not so that as individuals, we feel like this is my story and God gets to live in it, but rather I'm part of this bigger thing God's doing. And even these challenges, are part of what he's doing. How much of that becomes like your interaction with people as you're doing speaking gigs and different things, as people are realizing? Is it just that they're inspired by you, or is they realize that God also is doing something in their lives, or does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I hope that they see that God is doing something in their life. Yeah. Because think of how it shifts our focus. If I believe that the struggle that I'm going through is because God has a plan, or a purpose in that, and that somehow through this, he has given me this beautiful opportunity to give him glory, it makes all the difference in the world. I started to tell this earlier and then got sidetracked. I met a man once who had the same birth defect as me. He was born with both legs instead of one. So he was in a wheelchair, and he was a Christian, and we began this conversation, and I told him how I believe that God formed me for a purpose, and he said, God would never do that. People are born disabled because of sin in the world. And I don't disagree with that. I do believe that when God created man and woman, he created them with 2 arms and 2 legs that all work, and there's no illness and all that. And I suppose because sin entered the world, now we have sickness and we have deformities and we have all these different things that we have to deal with. But I couldn't agree with the fact that God would never form somebody like me with one leg, because in the Bible, it clearly says that he formed me. And this, as artistry, like a weaver who has this tapestry that they're designing with every strand. And at first you can't always see the beauty of that piece of art, but the artist knows what the full product end unit is going to look like. That's going to hang beautifully on the wall. And so my goal in speaking is that people understand that giving God glory is really the whole purpose that we're here anyway. And most oftentimes those opportunities come when we're in the most struggle, when things are the most hard, is when I think God is able to use us even more. And that doesn't make it any easier necessarily, but it shifts our focus. And all of a sudden, instead of looking at all the bad, we begin to look at all the ways that God is being glorified. And it makes all the difference in the world to me, and hopefully to others.
Well, you brought up some fairly profound theological questions here. Let's dive into those a little bit. So you mentioned Adam and Eve in the garden. They're born with, or they're created with 2 arms, 2 legs. Sin enters, and so there's something in the brokenness of this world that the root cause is sin. Okay, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And then we have a God who is sovereign over all of it, though, and that somehow, without explaining in any sort of detail, God uses this broken world. He uses even the sinful choices of people to accomplish his plan. In our anthropology class, theological anthropology, we were talking about we've been given a body right now in order to image God, right? There's something imago Dei about our body. Doesn't mean that God has a body. He had to incarnate to have a body, but in order to do the task of imaging God, he gave us a body, and so that is a part of the imago Dei. And then we were talking about the new body that's promised. The new body that's promised. And I said, well, God will give us a body there that will allow us to do the things that he wants us to do, right? He equips us to do those things. And so it raises the question of the body that God fearfully and wonderfully created in this broken world. What's your hope for the new body in the resurrection, Roni?
Well, people always ask me, if you had 2 legs, what would you do? And they're quite simple, honestly. If I had 2 legs, the first thing I would want to do is be able to walk to the bathroom in the morning, get out of bed and be able to walk versus hop or use my crutches. Those are the 2 things that I do when I'm not wearing my artificial leg. Simple, right? The other thing I'd like to do is wear high-heeled shoes. Now, that's less important to me now that I'm older than it was when I was younger. So they're really simple things. But I have this vision of someday God walking up to me, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, all 3 of them together, and I don't know how that will work, and have this new real leg on a silver platter and handing it to me like a gift. Just like the artificial leg that I wear now is part of me, this new leg that's made out of flesh and bone and is real. And I put this new leg on symbolically somehow and now walk like a 2-legged person, essentially. So I do believe that the resurrected body will be completely whole.
Okay.
I really do. I don't know that for sure, but it seems like it is the case. It's funny, when I was a kid and I was walking with my parents, and I used to fall a lot more than I do now. And I remember them holding my hand, and if I hit an uneven part of the ground and started to stumble, they would hold me up and keep me held up. And I always envisioned my entire life as if Jesus was walking beside me, essentially holding my hand, so that when I stumbled or fell, even though I'm really good at it, because I am consider myself a falling expert, but nonetheless, Jesus would hold me up. And then, so that's why I love the symbolism that I've created in my own mind about this silver platter leg, that it is this gift to me. And I don't even know if we'll have to go to the bathroom in heaven, or even sleep. I don't know if we will. Getting up in the morning and having to go to the bathroom may be something completely different. Who knows about the shoes? But I do believe that we'll have completely whole bodies, whatever that looks like at that time.
This is happening in time, so Good Friday is coming. This is Holy Week, and so I've thought a lot about the scars that he shows the disciples. It's interesting to me that he is whole. Mm-hmm. Jesus is whole, right? He's resurrected. He's whole. He's doing these resurrected things, and yet there's this tension where he's whole, and yet there are these marks that are not just the marks of what people did, but what God did through Christ to atone us and make us right. And as you're striving that, it just makes me wonder if there's not some way that it's both totally restored and whole, but then some way that any of us kind of bear the signs of this world that God has brought us through, and as we're whole. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something you've ever...
I do think about that. There's that song by Casting Crowns, the only scars in heaven are the ones don't belong to you and me, but on basically the hands of Jesus, and probably the feet too, and a side.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if Jesus has these scars, that does throw a bit of a conundrum in there, because are we not going to have any of our scars? I mean, are we going to be resurrected differently than he has been? I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
I can only hope. I do know this: there's no pain, there's no suffering.
No.
Yep.
And so whatever it is, I know that it will be just exactly the way that it should be.
Yeah.
And that I can rest in. Just like in my book, I say that if I believe that God has a plan for my life, then basically it comes down to, do I trust him?
Yeah.
Whatever comes, do I trust that he's got a purpose in that? And, even if I didn't have a really great life, which I have so far, I got to believe that God created me with a reason for having one leg, if for nothing else, because it has kept me close to him my entire life. Maybe he knew me before I was ever born, and knew how prideful and vain and all of these things that I deal with. And he knew that if I didn't have a reason to cling to him in such a way as he's holding my hand when I fall, that I would have strayed or gone a different direction completely. And so I'm so grateful that I have one leg. Even if I never won any medals, never was able to do any of the fun, incredible things that happened only because I had one leg, that it has definitely driven me to Christ, into his love and support and comfort in all of those situations.
Wow. We almost should end there. We probably should, but I have a couple practical questions to ask you now, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
How do churches do when it comes to handicaps, disabilities? Is there anything that you would say to the church leaders who are who are listening?
We're people. We're people just like anybody else, and I always hope people do ask me what's going on, and that way they don't have to be afraid of saying the word leg and think, oh my gosh, I just said the word leg in her presence, and she's gonna think I'm talking about her disability. Just get it out in the open and discuss it and learn what that person's difficulties are and their challenges are, and what they want. Ask and just treat them like a regular person.
You mentioned earlier that you were speaking to a bunch of high schoolers and middle schoolers, and I don't think I've ever talked to a woman who looks back on their middle school years fondly. There's just really, really difficult times. It's because of changes that they're undergoing, and it's very, very difficult. And you said you were no exception to that. How does your ministry, the opportunities you get to speak to youth who are going through these kind of changes, how has what God has done in your life, how does that enable you to speak hopefully to them?
I think it really helps to have something visibly wrong with you when speaking with youth, because they can see, oh my, she's missing her leg. And look how cool her life was anyway because of that. And therefore, when they look at the things that they're dealing with, because let's face it, youth today, I don't think it gets any easier to be a teenager as time goes on, because we didn't even have social media back when I was a teenager. That adds a whole new dimension to this idea of self-acceptance. And it's difficult at any age, but particular in those early teen years. So having something visibly obvious is a huge tool that I get to use when I do speak to teenagers. Because they're like, wow, look at the way she walks, and yet she was able to do this and this and this. And she thinks it's a gift from God even? Wow. Maybe God has gifted me with being too short or being too tall or whatever the case may be. And this acceptance and this love that we get to have for ourselves. I mean, I don't want to talk about self-love in a selfish way, but this self-love that God has designed me in this beautiful artistic way, and I get to love that about myself. And I think it is a strong message that needs to be put out there more and more and more in our current day and age. My body is not my enemy. It is not something I hate, but something that is a gift. It is something that is a blessing from God to give him glory and to fulfill his purpose for my life.
How do you think the church does in, say, like youth ministry when it comes to communicating that? Better, I don't want you just to be critical. What words of encouragement would you give to people who work with young men and women?
Wow, there are so many people that really spoke into my life that I just think that really, again, treating them like just one of the other students is very helpful so that they feel like they are included and a part of the group, not necessarily singling them out as separate from the group, but singling them out as really getting to know them and understanding what's going on inside of them is, I think, very important. So if you can, this balance between making them feel completely normal and treating them as completely special. So they feel that uniqueness, they feel that extra love being poured upon them. I know that is something that was very significant to me as I was trying to deal with all of the self-hate and the guilt about why God would have tortured me like this.
I just think it's really beautiful, though. I feel like I'm hearing you say almost as if you've been entrusted with this. And it's just a joy to hear how God is working out all things for good, is being worked out in the laboratory of life.
Yeah.
That it's not a theoretical, that he is in fact working out all things for good in all these different intentions we're working out.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a song that, this old song, and I'll just share the words with it. It's by Janet Paschal, I believe. If I had my way, I might have been wading through the waters when you wanted me to walk upon the sea. And if I had my say in all of my wants and whims and wishes, you knew how weak, how shallow I would be. I trust my wisdom, your wisdom over mine, because you've proven over time that in my narrow way of seeing things, I'd leave the best behind. I might not have stayed as close if I'd had my way. And I think that is a huge message to give to our youth and anybody, but particularly our youth. This whole idea of just kind of plodding through the water instead of walking on the surface is very powerful, at least it is for me.
Well, that is a good note to end on. Thank you. So Roni's book is called From the Start, Trusting God's Course for My Life, and you can get that on Amazon, I take it?
You can also get it on my website, which is ronisasaki.com.
ronisasaki.com, ronisasaki.com. So you're a student at Western. You go speak at events. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I speak at events. I speak at churches, lots of women's retreats. I was asked, the reason I'm at Western is I was asked, do you ever do anything besides give your testimony?
Okay.
And I said, sure. So I feel a huge responsibility to get it right. And so that's why I believe God has led me here to Western.
All right. Well, I'm glad that he did. I'm grateful for that. So thank you so much, Roni.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun.
You've been listening to Food Trucks in Babylon, a Western Seminary podcast. Music is provided by Cortland Urbano. If you want more information on Western Seminary, please go to westernseminary.edu.